If our civilization ended tonight, within 10 million years, there would be almost no sign we ever existed. The glass towers of our cities would be ground back into sand. Our monuments, the pyramids, the skyscrapers, the dams, erased by earthquakes, storms, and oceans that never stop moving. Even the satellites above us, the glittering necklace of lights in orbit, would tumble, burn, and vanish. Every story you've ever heard, every invention you'd have ever used, every trace of who we are, gone. The thin layer of dust sealed inside rock, a chemical scar hidden in soil. That's all that would remain. And in the quiet of that realization, something shivers across the mind. If our world can vanish so cleanly, then maybe it already has. Maybe it isn't just the future we're imagining, but the past we've forgotten. Hello, and welcome to Smarter by Midnight. Tonight, we step into one of the strangest questions you can ask about reality. Not about aliens, not about the future, but about the long dark corridors of time before us. What if we are not the first? What if civilizations once rose and fell on this planet, vast, intelligent, thriving, only to be swallowed by time so completely we can barely guess they were here? Pause for a moment. Picture it. An entire world humming with technology, art, and order gone, buried beneath shifting continents, washed away by rising seas, obliterated by fire and ice, until nothing remained. And here sits the haunting truth. If such a civilization existed, we might never know. Erosion, tectonics, volcanic fire, endless waves, all conspire to wipe the slate clean. Stone crumbles, metal rusts, oceans reclaim coastlines. Even the fossils of our bones, given enough time, would be erased. Think of that when you look out your window tonight. The glowing lights of the city, the hum of traffic, the quiet pulse of human life moving forward, hour by hour. If it all ended tomorrow, the earth would barely remember us. And so we ask again, softly but seriously, what makes us so sure we were the first? Before we continue, if you're drawn to mysteries like this, if you want to explore science, myth, and wonder at the quiet edge of sleep, you can hit the like button on this video and subscribe if you wish. That way, the next time we wander into the strange midnight corners of knowledge, you'll be here with us. Think of it as a ritual, a soft invitation into curiosity and calm. Now, let's go deeper. Imagine standing on the shore of deep time. The ocean before you isn't made of water, but of years, billions upon billions of years. Each wave is an age, rising and breaking, leaving behind only fragments in the sand. In that endless sea, our story, the story of human beings, is no more than a ripple, 6,000 years of history, a fraction of a second against the Earth's long clock. And in that silence, in that immeasurable expanse of forgotten ages, how many other ripples might there have been? Civilizations that rose, built, flourished, and then vanished before the tide of time rolled on. This is the possibility we step into tonight, not as fact, not as fiction, but as a dream that belongs to Earth itself. Imagine standing on the shore of deep time. The ocean before you isn't made of water, but of years, billions upon billions of years. Each wave is an age, rising and breaking, leaving behind only fragments in the sand. In that endless sea, our story, the story of human beings, is no more than a ripple, 6,000 years of history. a fraction of a second against the Earth's long clock. And in that silence, in that immeasurable expanse of forgotten ages, how many other ripples might there have been? Civilizations that rose, built, flourished, and then vanished before the tide of time rolled on. This is the possibility we step into tonight, not as fact, not as fiction, but as a dream that belongs to Earth itself. The Earth is old, unimaginably so, 4.5 billion years. Try to hold that number in your mind. It's impossible, isn't it? Our own lives barely stretch a century. Our recorded history, just a few thousand years. Compared to Earth's age, it's as though we opened a book that was thousands of pages long and began reading at the very last sentence. So much has come before us. So much has been erased. Geologists tell us that the planet is a restless sculptor. Continents drift like rafts. Oceans rise and fall. Mountains climb skyward, only to be ground down into sand again. Everything we build is temporary. Everything we know is fragile. If you walk through the ruins of an ancient city today, a place like Babylon or the crumbled temples of the Mayans, it feels eternal. Stone arches reaching toward the sky, carved walls whispering of forgotten kings. But even those ruins are infants in the scale of Earth. Given another 10,000 years, they will be gone. Given 1,000,000, not a single brick will remain. And yet, human imagination doesn't let go so easily. Till we tell stories. We dream of Atlantis, swallowed by the sea. We whisper about Lemuria, drowned beneath the Indian Ocean. We wonder about worlds before ours, half remembered like fragments of a dream. Are these only myths, or are they shadows of something real? Science edges into the same mystery, quietly, cautiously. The Silurian hypothesis, proposed by two scientists at NASA, asks a startling question. If an advanced civilization had existed millions of years ago, would we even be able to find its remains? Their answer is chilling. Maybe not. Almost everything we build, steel, glass, plastic, either crumbles, burns, or is buried. Even radioactive waste, one of the most stubborn things we produce, fades after a few million years. What lasts is not monuments, but traces, thin signals in the rocks, tiny chemical fingerprints in the soil, a shadow of a shadow. So picture this, a world before us, civilization that rose, flourished, and then fell. Their cities erased by rising seas, their monuments ground to dust, their bones scattered and lost. And all that remains is a faint echo hidden deep in the strata, waiting for someone, maybe us, to ask the right questions. And here we are tonight, asking those questions, not to prove, not to solve, but to wander, to drift with curiosity across the vast ocean of time. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing at the edge of that ocean. The waves are not water, but centuries. Each one rises and falls, carrying away entire ages. You cannot see across it. You cannot see the shore. You only feel its endless rhythm, its deep and patient silence. That is Earth-Sep's memory, and inside that silence, there may be ghosts, not spirits, but civilizations, not myths, but histories erased. And if we listen carefully enough, perhaps we can still hear their echoes. Imagine for a moment that the ground beneath you is not solid, but a palimpsest, a page written on, erased, and written on again. That is what the Earth is. It keeps rewriting itself. Volcanoes, spill rivers of fire that bury whole landscapes. Glaciers grind valleys into dust. Continents sink, rise, and break apart. If there were civilizations before us, their traces may already have been swept away, folded deep into the mantle, recycled like paper fed into a fire. And yet, fragments slip through, fossils pressed into stone, odd alignments in ancient sites, stories carried down in myth. Each one is like a whisper in a dream, incomplete, fragile but impossible to ignore. Think about Atlantis. For centuries, it has lingered in human imagination, a place of wonder, swallowed by the sea. Plato wrote of it. Poets sang of it. Explorers searched for it. Maybe it never existed, or maybe it was a memory of something real, passed down through voices until it turned to legend. Think about the flood myths. They appear in cultures across the world, in Mesopotamia, in India, among the Maya, in the Hebrew Bible. Different peoples, different centuries, yet the same haunting image: the world drowned, humanity erased, a reset. Are these only coincidences? Or do they point to cataclysms that once reset the clock of civilization? Science doesn't confirm these stories, but it doesn't dismiss the possibility either. We know the Earth has faced cataclysms, ice ages that covered continents, asteroids that darkened the sky, volcanoes that blotted out the sun. Each one could have ended more than species. Each one could have ended cultures we will never know. Close your eyes and let the vision rise. A city at night, lights burning bright, towers standing tall, and then a sudden silence. The ground shakes, the seas rush in, the lights flicker out. In a single season, the city is gone. In 1,000 years, its ruins are buried. In 1,000,000, the land has shifted, the ocean floor has risen, and nothing remains. This is not fantasy. It is geology. It is how the earth works. And here is where the thought becomes haunting. If this is what would happen to us, then what does that say about what may already have happened? Civilizations may not just be lost. They may be unrecoverable, invisible, erased so thoroughly that their only trace is the human hunger to imagine them. So tonight, as you listen, let yourself drift into that hunger, not as fear, but as wonder. The wonder of not knowing. The wonder of asking questions we cannot answer. Because in the silence of that uncertainty, your mind becomes free. Free to wander across forgotten continents. Free to stand at the edge of vanished oceans. Free to dream of civilizations that may have dreamed long before us. And perhaps that is the greatest gift of all. Not certainty, but curiosity. Not proof, but possibility. Let the thoughts settle in. We may be the latest dreamers of Earth, but perhaps not the first. The Earth hides its past well. It covers its scars with forests. It buries its bones beneath oceans. It folds its ruins back into stone. If another civilization walked this planet long before us, they would now be strangers to us, invisible strangers, erased by time itself. But the possibility lingers like a shadow at the edge of thought, because when you zoom out, far out, into the billion-year scale, the pattern is clear. Life surges. Life collapses. Species rise. Species vanish. Cycles repeat. Who is to say civilization is any different? Perhaps we are just one blossom in a garden that has bloomed and withered many times before. Perhaps there have been others, civilizations of fire, or stone, or seas, each one thinking itself eternal, each one fading into the silence. And here we are, Tonight, standing on the thin edge of the present, staring back into an ocean of forgotten time. You can feel it, can sit you. The strangeness of knowing that our story is so fragile that if humanity disappeared tomorrow, the earth would not even pause. It would keep moving, reshaping, rewriting. It would sweep us away as easily as it swept away the dinosaurs, the trilobites, the vanished forests of the Carboniferous Age. And just like that, we would be another forgotten dream. But tonight, we don't need to fear that dream. We can rest inside it, because in the end, this is not a story of endings. It is a story of perspective, a reminder that we are small, but we are here, that we may not be first, but we are part of something vast, something ancient, something still unfolding. So let your thoughts drift with mine. Drift over drowned cities that may never be proven. Drift across lost continents that may never return. Drift through the possibility that Earth has dreamed civilizations before and will dream them again. And as you drift, let the question echo softly in your mind. Are we really the first? Or are we simply the latest note in an endless song that Earth has been singing for billions of years? Take a breath. Let the question stay with you. Let it carry you further into the night, because our journey has only just begun, and in the hours ahead, we will wander deeper through the vastness of time, the silences in the record, and the myths that may be memories of worlds before ours. But for now, all you need to do is listen, to feel the stillness of the midnight hour, and to remember that even in silence, the earth keeps dreaming. When we talk about history, we usually mean a few thousand years. We picture the pyramids, the Roman Empire, the invention of writing, the rise of electricity, the first computers. It feels immense, long enough that our minds struggle to hold it all. But compared to Earth's true history, it is a blink. The planet is about 4.5 billion years old. That number is almost meaningless on its own, too big to grasp. So let's shrink it into something we can understand. Imagine Earth's entire history compressed into a single day, just 24 hours. At midnight, the planet forms. In the early morning, oceans appear. By 5 a.m., life begins, not fish or plants or people, but single tiny cells. For hours, that's all there is. Then, much later in the afternoon, more complex life appears. Creatures with bodies, shells, fins. At around 10:45 p.m., dinosaurs walk the earth. They live for nearly an hour of that clock before vanishing at 11:40. In humans, we arrive at 11:59 p.m. civilization. Everything from agriculture to smartphones fits into the last few seconds before midnight. That's how small we are in the sweep of time. Just seconds. And if we're only seconds, what might have happened in the many long hours that came before us? This is where things get interesting. We assume the deep past was empty of civilizations like ours. But why? Is it because we've proven no one was there? Or is it because the Earth is so good at erasing its own memory? Think about how fragile our world really is. Buildings crumble in centuries. Bridges rust, roads crack and are swallowed by weeds. Even the tallest skyscraper, if abandoned, would turn to dust in less than 10,000 years. That sounds long to us, but on Earth's clock, it's nothing, a blink within a blink. If we disappeared today, what would remain in a million years? Maybe some stone monuments, maybe tiny chemical traces in the soil. but most of what we've built would be gone. So here's the question. If an advanced civilization existed millions of years ago, what traces of it would we expect to find? Would we even recognize them? This is not just science fiction. In 2018, two scientists, Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank, posed this very question in what's now called the Silurian hypothesis. They asked, how would we detect a past industrial civilization? Their answer was unsettling, not by ruins, not by cities, not by monuments, but by tiny changes in geology and chemistry, by hints, not proofs. That saps all. That saps how little might remain. So let's turn the question back on ourselves. If we are nearly invisible after only a few million years, why are we so certain no one else came before us? This is where wonder enters. Imagine a civilization that thrived 100 million years ago. Maybe they built, maybe they farmed, maybe they harnessed energy in ways we can't even imagine. Then catastrophe came, an asteroid, an ice age, a shift in climate. Time rolled forward, continents shifted, seas rose and fell, and now nothing is left but a question. Would we know they existed? Or would we, as we do now, look at the silence of the past and assume it was always silent? The vastness of time is not just a fact, it's an invitation. It invites us to wonder about what could have been, about how many beginnings and endings might be buried beneath our feet. If we step back and ask what really lasts on Earth, the answer is not much. Stone can survive, but even stone wears away. Mountains that seem eternal crumble into sand. The oceans rise and reclaim entire coastlines. Even the continents themselves are temporary, drifting like rafts on the mantle below. This raises a troubling thought. If our world ended, how long before our traces were gone? We imagine ruins lasting forever, but forever is a word that belongs to human minds, not geology. The truth is, forever rarely exists. The Great Wall of China, the pyramids of Giza, even Mount Rushmore, all of them will eventually fade. Wind and water will eat them down. Earthquakes will topple them. The slow movements of continents will carry them elsewhere or bury them entirely. 10,000 years may sound like eternity to us, but it is a blink to the planet. 100,000 years, still a blink. 1,000,000 years? Now you're closer. But even then, most human artifacts would already be gone. So, let's ask the question again. If an advanced civilization rose 100 million years ago, what would be left? Would we expect a skyscraper? No. A dam? No. A fossilized car? Almost certainly not. Instead, we would need to look for subtler clues, chemical changes in soil layers, unusual isotopes in sediments, perhaps a sudden pulse of carbon in the atmosphere locked into stone. But here's the problem. Nature can create those same signals without help. Volcanoes, asteroid impacts, even natural climate cycles can mimic them. So even if we did stumble across evidence, how would we know it wasn't just nature's hand? This is the heart of the mystery. Time doesn't just erase, it confuses. It blurs the line between what is natural and what might have been artificial. And then there are the great resets. Earth has experienced at least 5 mass extinctions, each one wiping away most life. The asteroid that ended the dinosaurs is only the most famous. 250 million years ago, the Permian extinction killed off over 90% of species. Imagine that almost everything gone. To the survivors, the planet must have felt new, empty, beginning again. Here's a question to stir the imagination. What if a civilization existed before one of those extinctions? What if their story ended in the same catastrophe? Would we ever know, or would they be erased along with the animals and plants, buried in the same silence? And what about intelligence itself? We tend to assume it looks like us, two-legged, tool-using city building. But must it? What if intelligence bloomed in a form we wouldn't recognize? What if it was oceanic, like whales or octopuses? What if it was collective, like ants or termites, but scaled to something grander? Would we recognize such a civilization if we saw its traces, or would we dismiss it, blind to the possibility that intelligence does not always mirror our own reflection? This is what the vastness of time does. It humbles us. It reminds us that our little window, our few thousand years of recorded history, is almost nothing. It forces us to admit that we don't know what came before, and maybe never will. But it also opens space for wonder, because in those gaps, imagination thrives. In those silences, we are free to ask, what if? What if intelligence has risen more than once? What if civilizations have come and gone, leaving only whispers in stone and myth? And what if our own story is just one chapter in a book the Earth has been writing again and again across billions of years? The vastness of time does instead just make us small. It makes the universe feel larger, richer, and more mysterious than we ever thought. The Earth is not kind to memory. Unlike a library, it does not keep every page. Unlike a museum, it does not display its past with care. It is more like an artist painting over old canvases, again and again, until the first layers vanish under the latest strokes. Consider this. Over 99% of all species that ever lived are now extinct, and for most of them, there is no fossil record at all. Their bones and shells dissolved, their traces erased. They lived, they thrived, they disappeared, and the Earth quietly moved on. Even fossils themselves, which we treat as evidence carved in stone, are accidents. For a bone to become fossilized, it must survive predators, decay, erosion, and then be buried quickly in the right kind of sediment. Then it must avoid destruction by pressure, heat, or shifting rock layers. How many billions of lives have been lost to history simply because conditions weren't right? If this is true for bones, how much more true is it for things like buildings, tools, or machines? The steel of bridges rusts in centuries. The glass of skyscrapers crumbles in less than that. Roads crack and vanish under weeds. Wood returns to soil in decades. Even concrete, which feels permanent, eventually breaks down. Geology erases. That is what it does. And this is why the thought of civilizations before us feels both impossible and strangely plausible at the same time. If we expect to find intact cities or monumental ruins from millions of years ago, we will be disappointed. But if we expect silence, we must also admit that silence doesn't mean absence. It might just mean erasure. So how do we even begin to ask the question? One answer is through myths. Human cultures across the world hold stories of worlds before this one. Myths of golden ages, of floods, of continents swallowed by the sea. Atlantis, Lemuria, Shambhala, the Great Flood of Mesopotamia, the Deluge in the Hebrew Bible, the submerged lands of Kumari Kandam in Tamil tradition, Are these stories just metaphors, shaped by imagination? Probably. But could they also be distorted memories, cultural fossils, passed down and reshaped across thousands of years? Memories of floods, of vanished lands, of older civilizations that once thrived and were lost? We may never know, but the persistence of such stories raises questions worth considering. Why do cultures separated by oceans tell such similar tales of destruction and rebirth? Why does humanity hold so tightly to the image of worlds lost to water? And if myth can act as a kind of memory, could it also hint at deeper truths we haven't yet uncovered? Here it paths another thought experiment. Imagine archaeologists 100 million years in the future. They dig into layers of rock and soil where our cities once stood. What do they find? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps a few scattered chemical traces. A faint layer of plastics compressed into sediments. Maybe isotopes from nuclear tests. Subtle signs, but not undeniable proof. Now imagine those archaeologists are not human. Imagine they are intelligent beings, unlike us, shaped differently, thinking differently. Would they even interpret those traces as evidence of a civilization, or would they dismiss them as natural anomalies? Now flip the thought back onto us. What if we have already overlooked traces of earlier civilizations? What if we've brushed aside subtle anomalies, convinced they were natural, when in fact they were whispers of something artificial, something ancient? The vastness of time invites this kind of humility. It reminds us that we see through a narrow lens, bound by our assumptions. We expect technology to look like ours. We expect evidence to take familiar forms. But what if it doesn't? What if intelligence left behind signals in ways we don't yet recognize? Could some of the unexplained patterns in geology, some of the odd chemical signatures, some of the mysterious structures on the ocean floor be more than we think? Probably not, but possibly yes. And that possibility is where wonder lives. Because in the end, this isn't about proving other civilizations existed. It's about keeping the question alive. It's about recognizing that time is so vast and our slice of it so thin that certainty may never be possible. Then maybe that step's okay. Maybe what matters is not the answer, but the curiosity, the ability to look at the silence of the earth and ask, what if a civilization had risen before us? How would we know? What would count as evidence? We might imagine ruins, stone cities still standing, monuments pointing to the sky, or artifacts preserved in caves. But geology makes this unlikely. Millions of years grind stone into dust. Mountains vanish. Oceans open and close. Even fossils, which we treat as permanent, are rare accidents. For civilizations separated from us by deep time, we would need to search not for monuments, but for subtler fingerprints. Scientists have suggested a few. One clue could be chemistry. Civilizations change the atmosphere. We know this because we're doing it now. Carbon dioxide levels are rising at a pace faster than almost any time in Earth's history. If our story ended today, the carbon pulse would remain in the rock record for millions of years. Future geologists might see it as a thin line of change, a chemical scar marking our presence. Another clue could be plastics. We produce them in such vast amounts that they are already entering sediments around the world. Over time, plastics break down into microplastics, and some may fossilize. Millions of years from now, tiny fragments could remain, compressed into rock, hinting that something unusual once lived here. A third clue is radioactive isotopes. Nuclear activity leaves behind unusual elements not found in nature. Some fade with time, but others could remain detectable in sediments far into the future. If another civilization had ever split the atom, traces might still be hiding in the rocks. So yes, in theory, the Earth keeps records. But here is where the puzzle grows deeper. Nature produces many of the same signals. Carbon spikes have happened before, triggered by massive volcanic eruptions. Isotopes shift naturally after asteroid impacts. Even plastics, or something like them, could theoretically form in unusual geological conditions. This means that even if we found anomalies, we could never be entirely sure what caused them. Was it industry, or was it volcanoes? Was it intelligence, or was it chance? And this is why deep time is so humbling. It teaches us that certainty is not always possible. The earth speaks in whispers, and those whispers are easy to confuse. Now turn the thought back on ourselves. Imagine 1,000,000 years from now, humanity is gone. Our cities collapsed. Forests and deserts spread where highways once ran. From orbit, nothing looks unusual. Yet if someone dug deep enough, they might find a strange chemical signature, a sudden spike in carbon, a faint layer of plastics, odd isotopes that don't match natural patterns. Would they conclude a civilization once thrived here? Or would they decide it was just another natural event, one of many in Earth's long history? And what if they weren't human at all? What if they were something entirely different? Beings who think in ways we can't imagine? Would they even ask the right questions? Would they recognize those signals as signs of intelligence? Or would they look right past them, never realizing what they meant? It's possible that our greatest monuments will not be the pyramids or the skyscrapers, but the invisible chemical fingerprints we leave behind. Yet even those are fragile. Given enough time, the earth may wipe them away too. This raises an unsettling possibility. Maybe civilizations are not rare at all. Maybe they rise often, across time, and vanish just as quickly. Maybe the silence of the past isn't proof of absence, but only proof of impermanence. Think about it. If the dinosaurs ruled for 160 million years and intelligence never appeared, that suggests it might be rare. But if intelligence did appear, even briefly, and was erased, we would never know. The record would look the same either way, empty. So when we look at the deep past, how confident can we really be? How do we know we are the first? The truth is, we don't set, and maybe we never will. But that doesn't make the question meaningless. On the contrary, it makes it fascinating. It forces us to think beyond ourselves, to recognize that our moment is short, our legacy fragile, and our understanding limited. It invites us to be humble in the face of time, because one day, someone may look back on us and ask the same question we are asking now. Were they really the first? If the earth has one habit, it is starting over. It builds life, lets it flourish, and then suddenly it wipes the slate clean. Scientists call these moments mass extinctions. There have been at least 5, maybe more. Each one was catastrophic enough to destroy most life on the planet. Each one was also a reset, an opportunity for evolution to try again, to write a new chapter with new species, new forms, new possibilities. The most famous is the extinction of the dinosaurs, 66 million years ago. A giant asteroid struck near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The impact unleashed a chain of disasters. Shock waves flattened forests, tsunamis drowned coastlines, debris filled the sky, blocking sunlight. Temperatures dropped, plants withered, food chains collapsed. In a geological instant, the world changed. The age of dinosaurs ended, and the age of mammals began. Now ask yourself, if a civilization had existed then, what would have happened to it? Would it have survived the impact? Would it have found shelter, built defenses, endured the darkness, or would it have collapsed with everything else? Cities buried, technologies broken, histories lost. And if it had been erased, what would remain for us to find today? The answer is simple. Almost nothing. The asteroid and its aftermath would have destroyed nearly all traces. The few that survived would have been swallowed by erosion, buried under sediments, or recycled by shifting crust. The record would show only the impact, not the civilization. But the asteroid is only one example. 250 million years ago, long before the dinosaurs, the Earth experienced the Permian extinction. This was the most devastating reset in history. Over 90% of species disappeared. The cause may have been massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia, which released gases that poisoned the air and triggered runaway climate change. Oceans turned acidic, temperatures soared, life collapsed. If civilizations had existed then, their chances of survival would have been even worse than during the asteroid. Imagine entire continents shrouded in volcanic ash, oceans dead zones, air thick with toxins. What culture could survive that? Or consider the ice ages. Again and again, Earth has plunged into deep freezes, with glaciers covering continents. Each time ecosystems shifted, coastlines vanished, and habitats collapsed. Entire landscapes were buried under ice for tens of thousands of years. If civilizations thrived in those lost warm periods, they may have been erased under the crushing weight of glaciers, their ruins ground into rubble, their memory erased with the thaw. These events remind us of something uncomfortable. Civilization is fragile. We like to think of it as permanent, but history tells another story. Even in the short span of human existence, entire cultures have risen and vanished. Floods drowned Mesopotamian cities. Volcanoes buried Pompeii. Earthquakes toppled structures that once seemed eternal. Multiply that by millions of years, and it becomes easy to imagine how many civilizations could have been erased. And then, of course, there is the possibility of self-destruction. We often assume mass extinctions must be natural, but what if intelligence itself carries the seeds of its own collapse? What if earlier civilizations destroyed themselves through war, overconsumption, or technologies that spun out of control? If they did, what would remain for us to see? Maybe nothing, just a chemical trace, a blip in the record, indistinguishable from natural disaster. Which leads us back to us. Look around at the world today, the lights of cities glowing at night, the endless hum of engines and machines, the satellites orbiting overhead. It feels permanent, yet all of it could vanish in an instant. Another asteroid could strike. A supervolcano could erupt. Climate change could spiral beyond our control. A nuclear war could end everything in a season. And if it did, in a few thousand years, nature would cover the scars. In a few million, almost nothing would remain. That is the humbling lesson of time. Civilizations rise, but the earth does not keep them. It buries them, erases them, and starts again. So here is the wonder. What if we are not unique? What if we are simply the latest expression of a pattern that has happened before? Civilizations rising, flourishing, vanishing, all hidden beneath the weight of time. When we look into the silence of the past, we are not looking at emptiness. We are looking at a stage that has been cleared many times, ready for new actors. We just don't need to know who stood there before us. One of the reasons the vastness of time is so difficult to grasp is because we are creatures of the short term. Our lives last decades, maybe a century at most. Our memories fade after years. Our stories reach back only a few thousand years. Beyond that, time becomes misty, abstract, almost unreal. This is why we often imagine history as a straight line leading to us. We think of ourselves as the final result, the inevitable outcome of billions of years of evolution. We imagine the past as a long waiting room, with humanity as the guest it was all preparing for. But deep time tells another story. It tells us that humanity is not the conclusion. It is just one moment. Think about the dinosaurs again. They ruled the earth for 160 million years. That is nearly 800 times longer than the entire history of humanity. If we disappeared tomorrow, their reign would still make ours look like a flicker. And yet, when we look back at them, we rarely imagine intelligence. We see giant reptiles, lumbering and roaring, not creatures capable of thought or culture. But is that fair? Could intelligence have emerged in forms we cannot picture? Could it have bloomed and vanished, leaving no trace we would recognize? The truth is, we don't know. Our perspective is too short, our evidence too thin. We mistake silence for certainty. We assume that because we don't see signs of other civilizations, there never were any. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, not in a world where time is billions of years deep. Here's another way to think about it. If an alien civilization looked at Earth today, but could only examine a thin slice of the fossil record, what would they see? Perhaps they would find bones of fish and reptiles, but not humans. Perhaps they would see forests, but not cities. From that incomplete evidence, would they assume no intelligence lived here? Very likely, and yet they would be wrong. Now place us in the same role. We look back into Earth's deep past with a fossil record that is broken, scattered, and fragmentary. How confident should we really be in declaring that no intelligence ever existed before us? This is where humility enters. Deep time does not just make us feel small. It forces us to admit that we may not know as much as we think. Our knowledge is not a spotlight illuminating all of history. It is a flickering candle in a vast, dark cave. Most of the cave remains unseen, and in that darkness, possibilities hide. Could civilizations have risen and fallen long before us? Possibly. Could intelligence have taken forms we cannot even recognize? Possibly. Could the earth itself have cycled through ages of culture and silence, like breathing in and out across millions of years? Possibly. None of this means we should leap to conclusions, but it does mean we should remain open. It does mean that we should be cautious in claiming we are the first, the only, the unique, because here is the humbling truth. Even if we are the first, we will not be the last. One day, humanity too will vanish. It might be soon, it might be millions of years from now, but eventually, We will join the countless species already lost to extinction. Our traces will fade. Our stories will end, and if another civilization rises after us, whether human descendants or something entirely new, they will look back and ask the same question we are asking now. Were we the first? This is the gift of deep time. It does not just make us wonder about the past. It makes us reflect on the present. It asks us to see ourselves not as the pinnacle of history, but as a brief participant in a much longer story. And maybe that perspective is exactly what we need, because when we recognize how small we are, we also recognize how precious our moment is, how fragile, how fleeting, how worth protecting. When science reaches its limits, myth often steps in to fill the silence. Where evidence is thin, imagination supplies stories, and when it comes to the deep past, human imagination has been busy for millennia. Across the world, cultures tell stories of great civilizations that rose and fell long before our own. They speak of golden ages, of mighty empires, of continents swallowed by oceans. The most famous, of course, is Atlantis. First described by Plato, it was said to be an island of great power and knowledge, destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. For centuries, people have searched for it in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean, beneath the ice of Antarctica. Each theory fades, but the myth endures. Why? Because it resonates with something deep in us. The idea that greatness can vanish, that civilizations can disappear without a trace. Then there is Lemuria, imagined in the 19th century as a lost continent in the Indian Ocean, home to advanced peoples whose legacy was scattered across the world. Though the science behind Lemuria has long been abandoned, the myth still lingers, folded into stories of hidden histories and forgotten knowledge. In Tamil tradition, there is Kumari Kondam, a submerged land said to have been the cradle of early culture, now lost beneath the sea. In Mesopotamian legend, we find the tale of a great flood that wiped away humanity, echoed later in the Hebrew Bible. Among the Maya, there are stories of repeated creations and destructions, worlds that rose and fell before the current one. Different cultures, different times, different places, yet the themes are strikingly similar. A world destroyed, a civilization lost, a reset. Why do we tell these stories? One answer is simple. Humans have always lived close to disaster. Floods, earthquakes, eruptions, and storms have shaped our history. It makes sense that we remember them in story form, exaggerating them into tales of world-ending catastrophe. But another possibility is more intriguing. Could myths be cultural fossils? Distorted memories of real events from deep prehistory? Could a flood myth echo not just a local disaster, but a global change at the end of the last ice age, when rising seas swallowed coastlines across the world? Could the memory of a drowned continent reflect real land now lost beneath the ocean? And if some myths contain kernels of truth, could others carry faint echoes of civilizations erased from time? We can't know for certain, but it's worth noticing how persistent these stories are. Across continents and centuries, humans keep returning to the same themes: worlds lost, ages destroyed, cultures forgotten. Perhaps it is simply part of our psychology, a way of grappling with impermanence. Perhaps it is a warning we tell ourselves, a reminder that nothing lasts forever. Or perhaps it is more. Perhaps myths preserve not just imagination, but memory. Even if we never find proof, the existence of these stories shows something important. We are drawn to the possibility of past civilizations because it feels plausible. It feels true to the way the world works. We sense, even without evidence, that the earth has had many chapters and ours is not the only one. This is what makes myths so powerful. They are not science, but they spark the same wonder. They invite us to imagine worlds beyond our own, and in doing so, they remind us that silence does not always mean emptiness. Sometimes, silence is simply a page that has been turned, leaving us to wonder what was written there before. If an earlier civilization did exist, one of the greatest challenges would be knowing how to recognize it. Evidence is rarely straightforward. Even in the present, with our own history, traces can be misunderstood. Artifacts can be misdated. Natural formations can be mistaken for human work, and human work can be dismissed as natural. The deeper into time we go, the harder the puzzle becomes. Take, for example, the Bimini Road in the Bahamas. It is a formation of large stone blocks beneath the sea, aligned in what looks like a roadway. To some, it appears to be the remnants of an ancient civilization, perhaps even the fabled Atlantis. To geologists, it is a natural formation created by the fracturing of limestone. Both interpretations exist. The evidence itself does not give a clear answer. Or consider the Baghdad Battery, a small clay jar found in Iraq with components that resemble electrodes. Some suggest it could have been a primitive battery, evidence of knowledge far older than we thought. Others argue it was simply a storage vessel, its resemblance to a battery coincidental. Again, ambiguity reigns. Even more puzzling are the so-called out-of-place artifacts occasionally reported, metal objects found in coal seams millions of years old, or stone carvings uncovered in unexpected layers. Most turn out to be errors in reporting, misidentifications, or outright hoaxes. But the allure remains. What if just one was genuine? What would that mean? The truth is, nature is a skilled builder. Geological processes can create patterns that mimic human design. Crystals grow in shapes that look like tools. Erosion carves forms that resemble statues or walls. The human brain, wired to see patterns, easily interprets these as artificial. At the same time, genuine artifacts are fragile. They decay, break, and disappear. The further back we go, the less likely they are to survive. This creates a strange overlap, natural forms that look human, and human artifacts that vanish into nature. Between the two lies a fog of uncertainty. And here is where the wonder emerges, because uncertainty is not a weakness. It is an opening. Uncertainty forces us to ask questions, to imagine possibilities, to admit that we may not know as much as we think. It keeps our curiosity alive. Perhaps this is why debates about anomalies never fully end. Even when science explains them, the imagination lingers. The Bimini Road may be natural, but it still makes us wonder what lies beneath the sea. The Baghdad Battery may not be a battery at all, but it still sparks the thought, could technology have appeared before we expected? And in that wondering, something important happens. We shift from assuming we are the first, the only, the inevitable, to recognizing that we might be part of a longer, stranger story. That shift is valuable, even if we never find proof of civilizations before us. It keeps us humble. It reminds us that knowledge is provisional, that certainty is rare, and that the universe is bigger than our conclusions. Science thrives on evidence, but imagination thrives on questions, and when it comes to the vastness of time, both are necessary. Because without evidence, we risk drifting into fantasy. But without imagination, we risk missing what could be true. So the anomalies remain not as answers, but as invitations. Invitations to look closer, to think wider, to hold space for possibility. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the value is not in finding an earlier civilization, but in learning to live with the question itself. When we think about the possibility of civilizations before us, it can feel unsettling. If whole cultures could rise and vanish without a trace, what does that say about our own permanence? The answer is uncomfortable. Our permanence may be an illusion. We often imagine that our buildings, our technology, even our digital records will last forever. Yet deep time shows us otherwise. Stone wears down, metal rusts, data requires machines, and machines decay. A few thousand years of neglect, and our proudest achievements will be rubble. A few million, and even the rubble will be gone. At first, that thought can feel bleak. Why build at all if time will erase us? Why write if the words will vanish? Why strive if the universe forgets? But there is another way to look at it. Impermanence does not make life meaningless. It makes it precious. The fact that our moment is short means it matters even more. The fragility of civilization is not a reason to despair, but a reason to take responsibility for it while it lasts. Think about the civilizations that came before us, not hypothetical ones lost in deep time, but the real ones we know. The Egyptians, the Maya, the Mesopotamians. Their monuments are broken, their languages faded, but their influence still echoes in us. They shaped mathematics, astronomy, law, and myth. Even if their stones crumble, their ideas live on. Now extend that thought. Even if humanity itself vanishes one day, what we do now could ripple forward. Perhaps fragments of our knowledge will survive, passed on to whatever comes after. Perhaps our brief existence will shape the course of life in ways we cannot predict. This is where the idea of cycles becomes important. The earth does not tell one story, it tells many. Life rises, falls, and rises again. Extinctions clear the stage, and evolution writes a new act. Civilizations, too, may follow this pattern. Perhaps we are not the first. Almost certainly, we will not be the last. If that is true, then our role is not to be eternal. Our role is to be a chapter that matters because it is part of a larger book. And if we are just a chapter, then the question becomes, what kind of chapter will we be? Will we be a cautionary tale? A civilization that rose quickly and collapsed just as fast? Or will we be a turning point, a civilization that lasted long enough to shape what comes next? This perspective can change the way we see ourselves. It strips away the illusion of permanence, but it also opens space for humility and purpose. It reminds us that while we cannot control eternity, we can influence the present. While we cannot outlast time, we can enrich the small slice we are given. So when we ask, what if we are not the first? We are also asking, what will it mean if we are not the last? Because one day, perhaps millions of years from now, another civilization may rise. They may wonder about the deep past, just as we do. They may look for signs of who came before. They may stumble across a faint trace, a layer of carbon, a fragment of plastic, a line of isotopes, and wonder what it means. And in that moment, we will become the mystery. We will be the question. We will be the whisper in the silence of time. That thought alone makes our moment worth cherishing. When we first compressed Earth's history into a single day, it showed us how small our place really is. Humanity, with all its wars and wonders, appeared only in the last minute before midnight. Civilization itself, cities, writing, agriculture, industry, arrived in the final seconds. It's tempting to look at that clock and feel insignificant, but insignificance is not the whole story. Think of the countless hours that came before us. For most of that time, life was simple, single-celled organisms drifting in ancient seas. Complexity emerged slowly, almost reluctantly. It took billions of years for the planet to produce creatures with bones, brains, and behaviors. And yet, in just a few seconds of the clock, one species, ours, managed to create languages, build cities, and reach beyond the planet into space. That contrast tells us something important. Our story may be short, but it is extraordinary. It shows what life can do when given the chance. But it also raises a haunting question. If so much can happen in a few seconds, what might have happened in the countless hours before? We assume silence. But silence may only mean absence of evidence. An absence of evidence is not proof. If other civilizations rose and fell in those hours, the clock has already turned the page on them. Their traces may be gone, their voices erased. All that remains is possibility. This possibility reshapes the way we see time. Just reminds us that history is not a straight line with us at the end, but a vast landscape filled with valleys we cannot see and peaks we may never climb. It reminds us that our knowledge is partial, provisional, always waiting to be rewritten, and it humbles us. Because if civilizations can rise and vanish without a trace, then we too are vulnerable. We too are temporary. We too can be erased. But humility is not despair. Humility is perspective. It is the reminder that while we may not last forever, we matter now, that while we cannot control the deep past or the distant future, we can shape the present, and in shaping it, we may influence what comes after. So as we close this chapter on the vastness of time, let's return to the image of the clock. It is 1 minute to midnight. We are here, alive, thinking, building, wondering. The seconds are short, but they are ours. And if we listen carefully, we can almost hear the faint echoes of what came before, whispers of civilizations that may have risen, flourished, and faded in the long hours of Earth's day. We cannot prove they existed, but we can let the possibility sharpen our imagination, deepen our humility, and expand our sense of wonder. And with that wonder, we turn to the next question. If the Earth has kept secrets from us, what exactly is it hiding? How much of its past has been erased, buried, or silenced? And how would we even know if something or someone had been here before? That is the mystery we face in the next chapter. The silences in the record. When you walk into a library, you notice the books, but you also notice the gaps, the empty shelves, the missing volumes, the spaces where stories should be but aren't. The Earth is like that. It has a library of stone, written in layers of rock and fossil, but the shelves are incomplete. Pages are missing. Entire chapters have been torn out by time. Geologists call it the fossil record. To most of us, that phrase sounds reassuring, like a catalog of everything that's ever lived. In truth, it is the opposite. The record is not a complete archive. It is a shattered puzzle with most of the pieces gone. For every species we find preserved in stone, thousands more are lost forever. For every ancient structure or artifact that survives, countless others have already crumbled into dust. The earth remembers selectively, and what it remembers is random. This is the silence we face, a silence measured not in moments, but in millions of years. Ask yourself this: if another civilization existed millions of years ago, would the earth have kept their story? Would we find their cities, their machines, their monuments, or would their traces be lost, folded into mountains, erased by rivers, swallowed by the sea? Here is where the silence becomes tricky, because silence does not always mean absence. Sometimes silence only means forgetting. Stone forgets. Oceans forget. Even fossils forget. And in that forgetting, possibility blooms. Think of the erosion of mountains. Once they stood tall, sharp against the sky. Now they are valleys, their peaks long carried away by wind and rain. If cities stood at their base, would we know, or would the stone have ground them down along with the mountain itself? Think of the drift of continents. What we now call Africa was once connected to South America. They split apart and drifted for millions of years. If civilizations existed on those joined lands, where would their ruins be now? Submerged, perhaps beneath the Atlantic, buried so deep they might never be found. And think of the sea itself. Coastlines are fragile. In the last ice age, sea levels were lower by more than 100 meters. Entire landscapes now lie underwater. If ancient people, or ancient others, built there, their cities would be gone, hidden beneath waves, unreachable without luck or technology. This is the silence of the earth. Erosion, drift, submersion. It is a silence that speaks loudly, not in words, but in absence. And here sits where a little rhyme creeps in, not for poetry's sake, but to remind us of the strangeness. Stone grinds down, seas sweep in. What was once is gone again. Pages torn, chapters lost. History fades at nature sip's cost. The rhyme is simple, but the point is sharp. The record is incomplete. So when we look at the past and declare with confidence, there was nothing before us, we should remember we are speaking over gaps, not through them. We are filling silence with certainty, and certainty, in the face of silence, is always fragile. What then is hidden in those silences? What might have been erased so completely we no longer even think to look for it? That is the mystery of the record. Not what it shows, but what it doesn't. If you've ever read an old diary with missing pages, you know the frustration. The story leaps forward, and you can only guess at what happened in between. The Earth's history is much the same. It is a diary written in stone, but most of its pages are gone. Scientists call these missing pages unconformities, gaps in the geological record where rock has been eroded away or never deposited at all. Some of these gaps stretch for millions of years. Whole eras vanish between one layer and the next. It is in those gaps that imagination lingers. What happened in the missing years? Was life quiet, or did it rise and fall unseen? Did entire civilizations appear only to be erased before the rock could capture their trace? The fossil record gives us clues, but even those are fragile. Most living things never fossilize. Bones dissolve, shells crumble, wood returns to soil. Fossilization requires a perfect storm of conditions: quick burial, low oxygen, just the right minerals. Without that, life vanishes without a mark. This means our picture of the past is not only incomplete, it is biased. We see what fossilizes well: shells, teeth, bones. We don't see soft-bodied creatures, plants that rotted away, or civilizations that built in wood instead of stone. The record remembers stone and forgets cloth, remembers bone and forgets song. So here's a thought. What if an earlier civilization built differently than we do? What if their structures were organic, designed to merge with the environment instead of resist it? What if their tools were biodegradable, meant to return to the soil? Would we ever find them, or would the earth have digested them completely, leaving nothing behind? When we look back through time, we often mistake what survives for what was most important. But survival is not the same as significance. It is chance, not meaning. The loudest stories in stone may not be the truest ones. This is where the silences become most profound. They remind us that absence is not proof. They remind us that what is missing may matter as much as what remains. Sometimes, a silence can even be suggestive. For example, the Cambrian explosion, that sudden burst of diverse life around 540 million years ago. The record shows life before it was simple. Then suddenly, in a geological instant, complex forms appeared. Where did they come from? Why then? What was lost in the pages before that leap? We may never know, but the silence around the Cambrian is almost louder than the fossils themselves. And this brings us to an uncomfortable truth. When we talk about the history of life, we are really talking about fragments. The book is not whole, it is half written, half erased. We speak confidently, but beneath that confidence lies a fragile foundation. Sometimes I wonder, and perhaps you do too, whether the earth has already told this story before, whether civilizations have risen, been erased, and then been forgotten, and whether we are simply the latest attempt, standing on a stage that has been cleared many times before. The silence doesn't answer. It leaves us hanging, waiting. But in that pause lies the wonder. And sometimes silence rhymes with fear, and sometimes it rhymes with possibility. If the land forgets, the sea forgets faster. Oceans are not museums, they are erasers. Coastlines shift with every tide, every storm, every rise in sea level. Cities that hug the shore are temporary guests, sooner or later invited back into the water. Even in our own short history, we can see this truth. During the last ice age, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today. Vast stretches of land that once held rivers, forests, and perhaps human settlements are now deep underwater. By some estimates, more than half of humanity's earliest villages may lie drowned along ancient coasts. Think about that for a moment. Half of our beginning, not because it never existed, but because the ocean rose and swallowed it whole. Now imagine millions of years of such changes, continents breaking apart, seas opening and closing, islands appearing, disappearing. What chance would any coastal civilization have of being remembered? The ocean floor is not a gentle resting place. It grinds, buries, subducts. Sediments pile high, crushing whatever lies beneath. Tectonic plates drag the seafloor downward, pulling it back into the mantle. In time, even the deepest ruins are recycled as magma. If civilizations once built along ancient coasts, as we do now, their traces are likely gone, not hidden, not buried, but erased beyond recognition. This is why the silence of the oceans may be the deepest silence of all. It is not the silence of stillness, but of motion, waves, currents, shifting plates. It is a silence that doesn't merely cover, but consumes. We know this even from modern disasters. When tsunamis strike, whole towns are pulled into the sea. Within years, the evidence is scattered. Within centuries, it is dust. Within millions of years, it is as though the towns never stood at all. And here, Spets, where a quiet rhyme slips in, almost by accident. What the ocean takes, it does not keep. It swallows whole. It buries deep. The ocean does not care for memory. It cares only for movement. This makes the search for lost civilizations especially difficult. We look on land, but forget that much of history may lie beneath the waves. If we struggle to find evidence of cultures only a few thousand years old, how could we ever hope to find traces millions of years gone? Sometimes, divers stumble across hints, stone formations off the coast of Japan, submerged ruins in the Mediterranean, forgotten harbors hidden below the Black Sea. But these are the exceptions, rare survivors of relatively recent times. They remind us how much has already been lost, even in the blink of human history. Extend that blink into deep time, and the silence grows immeasurable. It raises an unsettling thought. What if the ocean floor is littered with stories we will never recover? Civilizations erased not by malice or mistake, but by tide and tectonics, their memory dissolved in salt and stone. We often say that history is written in the rocks, but perhaps the truest history, the one that holds the full sweep of life and civilization, is written in the water, and water does not keep books. What lies beneath our feet is not stable. The crust of the planet is broken into plates, drifting slowly over a restless mantle. Where they collide, mountains rise. Where they pull apart, oceans open. Where one slides beneath another, whole landscapes sink into fire. Geologists call this process subduction. It is the recycling of the Earth's surface. Old crust is pushed down, melted, and reborn as volcanic rock. In time, entire continents are consumed. This means the record of the Earth is not just incomplete, it is temporary. Imagine if you wrote your story on a page, and the page was torn up, burned, and rewritten every few 100 million years. That is what the Earth does. It is an archivist that writes, erases, and writes again. A library where most of the shelves are cleared before new volumes arrive. This has a simple but profound implication. If civilizations existed deep in time, the Earth may have recycled their pages entirely, not hidden them, not buried them, destroyed them. It is unsettling, isn't it? We think of stone as permanent, but even stone returns to fire. We think of continents as eternal, but they drift like rafts on the sea. The very ground that feels solid beneath our feet is only passing through. And here, without forcing it, a rhyme finds its way. What seems so strong is weak with years. Stone can fade, and ground disappears. Consider the age of Pangaea, when all the continents were joined into one vast landmass. It broke apart around 200 million years ago, scattering fragments across the globe. If civilizations lived then, their ruins would not simply be buried, they would be torn apart, scattered on different continents, dragged into the sea, or melted into magma. Even the fossil record is vulnerable to this recycling. Fossils preserved in subducted crust are destroyed forever. Entire eras may have been erased this way, their stories burned and remade as new rock. This makes the silence of the subterranean record one of the most profound. It is not silence from lack of memory, but from deliberate forgetting, the planet consuming itself, turning over its own history. And we must remind ourselves, this is not speculation, this is happening now. Old ocean floors are sliding under South America and Asia. New crust is forming in the mid-Atlantic. Mountains rise and fall within human memory. Earthquakes remind us of how alive the earth is. If the ground is this restless today, imagine what it has erased in hundreds of millions of years. The silence, like the others, humbles us. It reminds us that what we see in stone is not all that has been, that the earth itself decides what to keep and what to forget, and that decision is not in our favor. The record we study is not the truth of history. It is a fragment, a scrap. The rest is gone. When geologists peel back the layers of the earth, they sometimes stumble on a gap. Rock that should be there is missing. Entire periods of time are gone. These absences are called unconformities. They are not small gaps, like a page missing from a diary. They are yawning chasms of history. Some unconformities stretch tens of millions of years. Between one layer and the next, whole ages vanish. One of the most famous is the Great Unconformity in the Grand Canyon. Here, layers of rock, hundreds of millions of years old, lie directly beneath much younger ones. The in-between, an immense span of Earth's history, is missing, gone without explanation. What was lost in that silence? We may never know. Perhaps only erosion and empty landscapes, but perhaps more. It is tempting, almost irresistible, to wonder, could civilizations hide in these gaps? If cultures rose and fell during those missing millions of years, the rock would not show them. Their story would be gone before the next layer formed. Of course, science cannot leap to such conclusions. The simplest answer is erosion. Wind and water strip rock away. Then new sediments bury what remains. That is enough to explain the gaps. But the scale of the missing time is sobering. Hundreds of millions of years, erased as though they never happened. Enough time for life to rise, flourish, and vanish, with no trace left behind. It reminds us of something important. What we see in the geological record is not continuous. It is stitched together like a quilt with missing squares. We admire the pattern, but most of the fabric is gone. This is why certainty about the past is dangerous. We say nothing was here, but what we really mean is nothing survived here that we can see. That is not the same thing. Unconformities are reminders of humility. They show us that history is not neatly stacked, but broken, scattered, interrupted. They whisper that silence is not simple emptiness, but absence we cannot fill. And here, a soft rhyme emerges without effort. The record keeps what chance allows. The rest is lost. The earth disavows. Think again of the Grand Canyon. Tourists look at its layers and see a timeline, a majestic stairway through history, and it is, but it is also incomplete. The missing chapters are invisible. but they are there in the silence. If civilizations existed in those vanished chapters, we might never know, not because they left nothing, but because time removed everything. And even if no civilizations rose in those gaps, the lesson holds. The story of Earth is not whole. It is a patchwork quilt with more holes than fabric. This is the true silence in the record, not the quiet of stillness, but the quiet of absence, a silence so deep it swallows certainty. When we think of forgotten civilizations, we don't need to leap millions of years into the past. We only need to look a few centuries back. Take the Maya. For hundreds of years, their great cities were swallowed by jungle. Stone temples stood hidden under vines and soil, unseen by the outside world. By the time explorers stumbled upon them again, the people who built them were long gone, their stories fragmented into myth. Or think of Pompeii. In a single day, ash from Mount Vesuvius buried the city alive. Streets, houses, shops, all silenced under a thick gray blanket. For nearly 2,000 years, the city lay hidden. Only when it was rediscovered did we learn the details of daily Roman life, frozen in time. Even closer to us, entire towns have been lost to rivers, shifting course, to deserts encroaching, to floods drowning valleys. Each time, the silence creeps in. Each time, memory fades. Now ask yourself, if we can forget civilizations after only 1,000 years, what happens after 1,000,000 or 100,000,000? History books give us the illusion of continuity, but memory is fragile. Cultures rise, collapse, and vanish into silence faster than we realize. The farther back we look, the thinner the thread becomes. And here, a line falls into rhythm without trying. What is remembered is only a part. What is forgotten may hold the heart. If human history itself can disappear so quickly, what chance would a civilization have in deep time? Our greatest cities might survive for centuries, maybe millennia, but eventually they too would fade. The jungle, the desert, the sea, all would reclaim them. This is why small silences matter. They show us how easy forgetting is. They remind us that even in recorded history, pages go missing. Whole cultures become whispers, known only by ruins or stories. Now stretch that forgetting across millions of years. Imagine entire cycles of life and civilization erased so thoroughly that no rediscovery is possible, not because they never existed, but because time removed every trace. This is what makes the silences in the record so powerful. They are not empty gaps. They are reminders of how fragile memory is, how easily stories are lost, and how arrogant it is to believe we will always be remembered. And yet, in that fragility, there is wonder, because the silence does not close the door. It opens it. It invites us to imagine what might have been. It makes space for possibility. The Maya returned to us because the jungle eventually gave them back. Pompeii returned because a shovel struck ash in the right place. But how many others remain hidden, waiting, or worse, erased completely? If this can happen in a span of centuries, what might the earth have already hidden in the span of eons? When humans encounter silence, we rarely leave it alone. We fill it. We fill it with stories, with myths, with explanations that turn gaps into meaning. Where the earth has torn out pages, our minds write new ones. This is why legends of lost civilizations appear again and again across the world. They are not just entertainment. They are bridges bridges over silence. Atlantis, Lemuria, Kumari Kondam, each is a response to absence. Each is a way of saying something must have been here, even if we can't prove it. The silence is too loud to ignore, so we dress it in story. Consider how many cultures share myths of a great flood. From Mesopotamia to India to the Americas, stories describe waters rising, lands drowning, humanity erased and reborn. Are these coincidences, or are they human attempts to explain the silence left by rising seas at the end of the last ice age, when coastlines and the settlements on them were swallowed? Silence makes us uneasy. It creates space we want to fill. That's why myths grow thickest, where the record is thinnest. And in a sense, silence is itself a storyteller, not by speaking, but by leaving gaps. A missing page is an invitation to imagine. An eroded layer is a stage where our thoughts perform. Sometimes, that performance leads to wonder. Other times, it leads to fear. But either way, silence has shaped human imagination as much as evidence has. Think of the stars. For most of human history, the night sky was a silence, no proof of what lay beyond. So we filled it with constellations, gods, and stories. The gaps between stars became canvases for our myths. Only later did science add its voice. The Earth's silences work the same way, where there are no fossils, no ruins, no records, or mind supply possibilities. We imagine golden ages, drowned kingdoms, civilizations erased. We tell ourselves these stories not because we know them to be true, but because the silence demands something in its place. And here, a soft rhyme lands without warning. Silence leaves the canvas bare. Imagination paints it there. This is why the question of lost civilizations persists. Even if science never proves them, silence ensures we never stop wondering. In fact, silence may be the most powerful force in history. It has shaped how we tell our past, how we imagine our future, and how we see ourselves in the present. Every gap becomes a mirror, reflecting our hopes and fears. Every absence becomes a canvas, waiting for our stories. The silences in the record are not just geological, they are psychological. They live in us as much as they live in stone. And maybe that is their greatest gift, because certainty ends the story, but silence keeps it alive. Science thrives on evidence. Rocks, fossils, artifacts, data. These are the anchors that keep us from drifting into fantasy. But even science must face the silences, and when it does, it walks a careful line. When the record is broken, scientists turn to inference. They piece together fragments and build bridges of probability. They say, if this fossil is here and that one is there, then something must have connected them in between. It is detective work, across millions of years, using only scraps of clues. Sometimes the gaps are narrow and the bridge holds strong. Other times the gaps are vast and the bridge feels like a leap of faith. Yet without those leaps, there would be no story at all. This is why silence is not the enemy of science. It is the engine. The questions that matter most come from what we don't know, not from what we do. Take the mystery of the Cambrian explosion. For billions of years, life was simple. Then suddenly, around 540 million years ago, the fossil record bursts with diversity, shells, exoskeletons, complex forms. Why? What happened in the silence before? Did conditions change? Did evolution reach a tipping point, or did something else occur that we may never fully grasp? The silence does not answer, but it frames the question, and questions drive discovery. The same is true of human prehistory. Archaeologists find scattered tools, bones, fragments of art. They connect the dots, but the lines between them are thin. Each gap in the record is a space of wonder. Did humans spread earlier than we thought? Did cultures rise and fall, leaving little behind? Did ideas appear more than once, in more than one place? Every silence opens possibilities, and in those possibilities, knowledge grows. This is why humility is essential. A scientist who faces silence and says, "We don't know yet," is stronger than one who pretends certainty. Because the truth is, silence does not care for our confidence. It waits, patient and vast, unmoved by our conclusions. And here a quiet rhyme slides in, barely noticeable. The louder the claim, the sooner it falls. Silence still waits behind the walls. Over and over, history has proven this. Once, we believed the earth was flat. Once, we believed it was the center of the universe. Once, we believed life was fixed, unchanging. Each time, silence eroded certainty, and evidence reshaped our story. So when we face the silence of the record and declare we are the first civilization, we should tread carefully, because silence has humbled us before, and it may do so again. Perhaps that is its role, not only to hide, but to teach, to remind us that knowledge is provisional, that discovery is endless, that humility is wisdom. And perhaps the silences are not empty at all. Perhaps they are full, not with answers, but with questions. Questions waiting for us to step forward, to listen, to wonder. When we think about silence in the record, we usually look backward. We wonder what might have been erased, what civilizations might have risen and fallen before us. But silence also stretches forward. One day, it will claim us too. Need to, it's just not a matter of if, but when. Wind, water, fire, ice. Civilizations feel permanent while we are inside them. We look at skyscrapers and believe they will stand forever. We see glowing cities from space and imagine their lights eternal. Yet deep time has no patience for such illusions. The same forces that erased the past will erase us. Storms that topple towers, wind, water, fire, ice. Storms that topple towers. And so we stand in the present, caught between two vast silences. Behind us, the deep past, pages erased, civilizations unknown, worlds forgotten. Ahead of us, the deep future, a silence that will one day claim our own story. Together, these silences frame the moment we occupy now. A brief spark, fragile but real, surrounded by a darkness that does not frighten, but instead humbles. The silences in the record do not diminish us. They invite us, they ask us to listen, to imagine, to remain open, to accept that what we know is only part of the story, to admit that mystery is not weakness, but strength. And so we end this chapter with the simplest truth of all. Silence is not absence. Silence is possibility. And in that possibility, myth begins to take shape. Because when silence grows too large, humans answer it with stories. When gaps stretch wide, we build bridges with legend, from Atlantis to flood myths to tales of golden ages. Our imagination fills the empty spaces left by time. Which leads us to our next chapter: myths as memories. Stories born not from evidence, but from echoes. Tales that may hold no truth, or may hold fragments of forgotten worlds. 4. Where the earth leaves silence, people leave stories. Every culture has its myths. Tales of beginnings, tales of endings, and often tales of worlds that came before. We treat them as legends, but sometimes they feel like something else, like memories carried across time, not precise, not reliable, but echoes of experiences too powerful to forget. The most famous is Atlantis. Plato tells the story in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. Atlantis was said to be an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, wealthy and powerful, a land of kings and engineers. But pride corrupted it, and the gods punished it. In a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis sank into the sea, never to rise again. For centuries, the story has fascinated us. Some dismiss it as Plato's allegory for arrogance and collapse. Others treat it as a clue to a real place. Perhaps Crete, perhaps the Azores, perhaps Antarctica. The search for Atlantis has inspired explorers, scholars, and dreamers alike. But beneath all the speculation lies a deeper truth. The story of Atlantis is not unique. Across the world, we find echoes of civilizations swallowed by catastrophe. In the Indian Ocean, some speak of Lemuria, a lost continent, said to have stretched between India and Madagascar. In the 19th century, it was proposed to explain similarities between fossils on distant shores. Science has since abandoned the theory of a vanished land, but the name lived on, woven into myth. Lemuria became a symbol of forgotten ages, a home for imagined wisdom. In southern India, Tamil tradition tells of Kumari Kandam, a land where poets once flourished, now drowned beneath the waves. For some, it is myth. For others, a memory of coastlines swallowed as seas rose at the end of the last ice age. And nearly everywhere, we find flood stories. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, who built a great boat to survive a flood sent by the gods. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah does the same. In India, Manu is warned of a deluge and builds a vessel to save life. Among the Maya, flood myths speak of worlds destroyed and remade. Different lands, different voices, but the same refrain: a world drowned, humanity erased, a beginning born from an ending. Why do these stories echo across cultures? One answer is simple: floods are universal. Rivers rise, seas invade, storms overwhelm. Early peoples experienced these disasters often, and their memory grew into myth. But another answer is more intriguing. Could these myths preserve faint memories of real global changes, like the massive sea level rise after the last ice age, when ice sheets melted and coastlines vanished? Could the stories of drowned lands be cultural fossils, distorted but enduring? And if that is possible for floods, could it be possible for other myths too? Perhaps Atlantis was never real. Perhaps Lemuria was never land. Perhaps Kumari Kandam was never more than a dream. But the persistence of such stories suggests something important. Humans sense that worlds can be lost, that civilizations can disappear, that silence in the record may hide more than emptiness. Stories endure because they speak to truths deeper than evidence. The truth that nothing lasts, the truth that the earth erases, the truth that silence always follows. And sometimes, The truth that silence is not the end, because memory can survive in story. A faint rhyme slips in, like a whisper. Stone may crumble, seas may rise, memory lingers in human eyes. Let's drift for a while inside the myths themselves. Poster Atlantis, as Plato described it, an island ringed with canals, its palaces glittering with precious metals, its harbors filled with ships from across the seas. The people were skilled in craft and confident in power. For generations they prospered, but pride grew heavy, and balance slipped. The gods turned away. Then, in a single day and night, the seas rose and swallowed all. Towers collapsed. Fires dimmed. In the morning, nothing remained. Now, shift the scene. Imagine Lemuria, not as science proposed it, but as storytellers reshaped it, a vast continent across the Indian Ocean, where beings of great wisdom lived in harmony with nature. Some tales place them as ancestors of distant cultures, others as guardians of secret knowledge. But always, the land itself is gone, taken by the ocean, erased from maps, remembered only in whispers. Travel east, and you find Kumari Kandam in Tamil legend. They speak of a land where poets gathered, where kingdoms thrived, where culture flowered in richness. But the sea was patient, and one day it advanced. Temples fell, fields drowned, songs that once filled the air fell silent, carried only by memory into the present. And everywhere, the flood. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim builds a boat. The waters rise, gods relent, and he survives with life preserved. In the Hebrew tale, Noah does the same. In India, Yelmanu is warned by a fish, divine and knowing, to prepare for the coming deluge. In Central America, the Maya tell of worlds remade after waters swept them clean. Different names, different settings, but the same refrain. The waters come, the world ends, a new beginning follows. What do these stories mean? Perhaps nothing more than cautionary tales, warnings about human pride and nature's power. But perhaps they are more. Fragments of memory stretched thin across centuries. People who watched coastlines vanish at the end of the last ice age may have told their children. Those children told theirs. With each retelling, detail shifted into symbol, fact into myth. Yet the core remained. The world can drown. Civilizations can be lost. This is why myths matter. Even when they are not literally true, they preserve patterns. They echo themes. They carry forward the sense of impermanence, the recognition that silence follows. Sometimes they hint at truths that science later rediscovers. The flood myths remind us that seas really did rise. The stories of drowned lands remind us how fragile coasts really are. The tales of golden ages remind us that memory is selective. We often imagine the past brighter than it was because loss makes us long. And here, a quiet rhyme weaves itself in, almost hidden. Myths may bend, and facts may fade, yet in their heart a truth is laid. So when we hear of Atlantis or Lemuria, we don't need to ask only, was it real? We can also ask, what does it remember? Perhaps not a literal island, but a pattern, not a lost kingdom, but the reality that kingdoms can be lost. In this way, myths are not opposed to science. They are companions to it. Where the record is silent, myths keep imagination alive. Where evidence is thin, myths remind us to look harder. Where history is missing, myths whisper that something may still be hiding. Not all myths are pure invention. Sometimes they echo real events, filtered through memory and reshaped by time. Take the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini. Around 1600 BCE, a volcanic eruption tore the island apart. Ash blotted the sky. Tsunamis swept across the Aegean. Entire settlements were buried in a moment. Centuries later, Plato wrote of Atlantis, an advanced island civilization destroyed in a single night. Was his story allegory? Almost certainly. But could the memory of Thera's destruction have fed the tale? Quite possibly. Or consider Krakatoa in Indonesia. When it erupted in 1883, the sound was heard thousands of miles away. The explosion darkened skies across the globe. In local legends, stories of fire, ash, and drowned lands endure. These myths are not mistakes. They are memories carried forward in story because the experience was too vast to forget. Even the great flood myths may preserve fragments of truth. At the end of the last ice age, melting glaciers raised sea levels by over 100 meters. Coastlines vanished, lowlands drowned. For the people who lived there, it must have felt like the end of the world. Is it any wonder that so many cultures remembered rising waters in myth? In Japan, the story of Namazu, the giant catfish, explains earthquakes. When the catfish moves, the ground shakes. Of course, it is not a catfish beneath the earth, but the myth remembers the tremors. It preserves the danger in a form people could grasp. Again and again, we see the same pattern. Myth exaggerates, reshapes, and layers meaning, but at its core, it often reflects lived experience. And here, without effort, the words lean toward rhyme. This blending of truth and imagination is what gives myths their staying power. A dry account of a flood may be forgotten in a few generations, but a story of gods sending a deluge, of heroes building arks, of humanity reborn that lasts. It carries forward the lesson, even if the details shift. And this may explain why myths of lost civilizations remain so compelling. They combine memory of disaster with imagination of greatness. They warn us of fragility while offering the drama of mystery. They make silence speak. The silences in the record invite us to wonder. Myths give that wonder shape. They are not proof of forgotten civilizations, but they are reminders that humans have always felt the pull of deep time, always sensed that worlds can be lost, always imagined that ours may not be the only story. Many myths do more than describe floods or fires. They speak of golden ages, times when humanity was wiser, stronger, closer to the gods, times when the world was better than it is now. The Greeks spoke of a golden age, followed by silver, bronze, and finally iron, each step a decline from the perfection of the first. In Hindu tradition, the yugas trace a similar arc from Satya Yuga, an age of truth and virtue, down through successive ages of decline. In Chinese legend, the time of the sage kings is remembered as one of harmony, wisdom, and justice, unlike the troubled dynasties that followed. Why do we tell these stories? Why imagine that the past was brighter than the present? Part of it is nostalgia. Human beings often long for what has been lost. We look back and see simplicity where there was hardship, purity where there was struggle. Memory softens edges. Time turns pain into longing. But part of it is something deeper. Golden Age myths reflect our awareness of fragility. They remind us that greatness is not guaranteed, that civilizations can rise and fall. They whisper that what we have now may not last. And here a rhyme comes unbidden, slipping into the cadence. We dream of light in ages past. We fear our own will fade as fast. The myth of a golden age is not just about the past, it is about the present. It reflects our doubts about who we are and where we are heading. By imagining a world that was better before, we measure our own shortcomings now. It may also be about hope. If the world was once golden, perhaps it can be again. Perhaps the cycle turns, and what was lost will return. In this sense, Golden Age myths are both warnings and promises, reminders that the arc of civilization bends but does not stop. Now imagine how such myths might sound if civilizations truly had risen and fallen before us. If the earth has already seen golden ages erased, then the stories may carry more than nostalgia. They may carry echoes, not accurate, not exact, but faint reflections of greatness lost to time. Whether they are memory or metaphor, Golden Age myths reveal something important. Humans have always sensed that we are part of a cycle, that nothing lasts forever, that silence waits, but so does renewal. And that may be why these myths endure. They connect us not just to the past we imagine, but to the future we fear and the hope we cling to. Not every myth is about glory. Some are warnings. The story of Atlantis is not just about a lost island. It is about hubris, the danger of pride, the downfall of those who think themselves untouchable. The lesson is simple. Power without humility leads to collapse. Flood myths, too, are more than tales of destruction. They carry instructions. Build boats. Prepare for disaster. Remember that the waters can rise without warning. In cultures where rivers flooded or seas advanced, these lessons mattered. They were survival guides wrapped in story. Volcano myths serve a similar role. In Hawaii, tales of Pele, the goddess of fire, remind people of the volcano's power. In Japan, Namazu the catfish embodies earthquakes. These myths don't just explain, they teach respect. They tell communities, do not forget what the earth can do. In this way, myths may outlast the civilizations that created them. Cities may crumble, languages may die, but stories can travel. They can leap across generations, carried in memory, reshaped with each telling. And sometimes, the lesson survives even when the details blur. Atlantis may not be real, but the warning about arrogance remains. The flood stories may not match a single event, but the message, be ready, stay humble, endure, still speaks. This is why myth may be our most enduring memory, not buildings, not machines, but stories, because stories are portable. They live in voices, in songs, in symbols. They survive even when stone does not. And here, a soft rhyme slides into place. Stone may fall and steel may bend. Stories endure beyond the end. If future civilizations ever rise after us, they may not find our skyscrapers or satellites, but perhaps they will inherit our myths, perhaps fragments of our stories, carried orally, written in forgotten books, echoed in art, will linger long after the evidence of our cities is gone. That is the paradox of myth. It is fragile in detail, but durable in essence. It may distort facts, but it preserves meaning. It may not give us proof of past civilizations, but it gives us insight into how humans face the silence of time. In the end, myths are more than memories. They are warnings wrapped in wonder, survival encoded in story, echoes of both fact and imagination. And that is why they remain, even when silence takes everything else. When we step back and look at myths as a whole, a pattern emerges. They are not just stories of floods, fires, or golden ages. They are bridges across silence. Where the earth has erased pages, myths supply replacements. Where the record is broken, stories knit the gap. They are humanity's way of refusing to leave silence unanswered. This doesn't mean myths are literal history. Atlantis is not a map. Lemuria is not a continent. Kumari Kondam may never have stood. Yet all of them hold value because they reflect how people wrestled with impermanence. They are our way of saying, we know things can be lost, and we know the earth forgets. The fact that flood myths appear across so many cultures is not proof of one single event, but it is proof that people everywhere saw the sea rise, the rivers swell, the world change suddenly. The survival of those stories shows us how human memory works. We encode danger in narrative so that future generations will not forget. And this may be the most enduring truth of all. Civilizations may rise and fall, cities may sink or burn, but myths travel. They slip free of stone and steel. They live in language, and language can move. Think of it this way. If another civilization rises millions of years after us, they may never find our skyscrapers, but they might inherit fragments of our stories. They might know of a flood, a paradise lost, a golden age that fell. They might not know our names, but they would know our warnings. And here, a rhyme surfaces as gently as a tide. Monuments break and empires fall, but myths outlive them, carrying all. This is why myths matter in the search for forgotten civilizations. They may not give proof, but they give persistence. They show us that memory is not only physical, but cultural. Even when stone is gone, story endures. So as we ask whether other civilizations came before, myths remind us that the question itself is timeless. We are not the first to wonder what was lost. We will not be the last. Every silence calls for stories, and every story carries a fragment of truth, even if it is only the truth that nothing lasts forever. In the end, myths are not answers. They are companions. They sit beside the silences in the record, filling them with voices, so that we do not feel alone in the vastness of time. They do not prove what was, but they prepare us to face what might be. And that is their power, because certainty ends the story. But myth, like silence, keeps it alive. If civilizations existed before us, their cities are gone, steel rusts, concrete crumbles, glass shatters to sand. A million years wipes the board clean. But perhaps not all is lost. Civilizations may leave fingerprints, faint, indirect, etched not in monuments, but in stone. Scientists have explored this idea. In 2018, Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank asked if an industrial society lived millions of years ago, would we know? Their answer, only through chemical scars. One clue is carbon. The burning of fossil fuels leaves a sharp spike in the atmosphere, eventually trapped in rocks. Today, our own emissions are climbing faster than almost any point in Earth's history. To a future geologist, it would appear as a thin band in stone, an anomaly whispering, Something unusual happened here. Another clue is plastic. Billions of tons spread through oceans and soil. They break down into microplastics, settling into sediments. With time, some may fossilize. In the distant future, they might appear as strange fragments in layers that should hold only natural forms. And then there are radioactive isotopes. Nuclear activity produces elements rare in nature. Some fade quickly, but others linger for millions of years. If they survive, they would be undeniable fingerprints of technology. Yet all of these traces share a problem. They are ambiguous. Carbon spikes also come from volcanoes. Isotopic shifts follow asteroid impacts. Strange polymers could form under rare geological conditions. The Earth mimics industry. So even if such fingerprints exist in the record, we might not recognize them. We might catalog them as natural quirks, never imagining they were signs of intelligence. Here, almost like an afterthought, a quiet rhyme lands. The Earth records, but not with care. Its pages smudge, its stories tear. This is the humbling truth of fingerprints. They may exist, but they are whispers, easy to overlook, which means the silence of the past may not be silence at all, only signals too faint for us to hear. The Earth has not been gentle with its inhabitants. Time and again, it has cleared the stage with disaster. Each catastrophe is both an ending and a silence. The most famous is the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs 66 million years ago. A single impact reshaped the planet, shock waves flattening forests, tsunamis swallowing coasts, debris veiling the sky. In months, sunlight dimmed, plants withered, food chains collapsed. Nearly 3/4 of life was gone. If a civilization had lived then, what would remain of it? Nothing familiar. Its cities would have been toppled with the forests, burned with the fires, drowned with the seas. Whatever traces survived the first weeks would have been ground down in the millions of years that followed. And yet, disasters also leave markers. That asteroid's impact left a thin global layer of iridium-rich clay, a scar in stone recognized by scientists millions of years later. The catastrophe erased, but it also inscribed. Other extinctions carry their own signatures. 250 million years ago, the Permian extinction, the Great Dying, wiped out more than 90% of species. The cause was likely massive volcanism in Siberia, releasing enough gas to suffocate oceans and boil climates. Its trace? Layers of ash, chemical shifts in carbon, oxygen levels plummeting. Again, the loss left silence, but also a scar. Ice ages, too, have left their signatures. Glaciers carved valleys, buried landscapes, ground mountains into dust. They erased, but they also preserved fossils trapped in frozen ground, pollen sealed in layers of ice. Each catastrophe shows the same paradox. The Earth destroys, but it also writes. It silences, but it also marks. If civilizations had existed in those times, their monuments would be gone, but their fingerprints might be mistaken for catastrophe itself. What Tassa's a carbon spike read as volcanism, an isotope shift blamed on meteors. The signs could be there, buried in disaster, and we might never know the difference. And here, the rhythm bends toward rhyme without trying. What ends in fire, or ends in frost? The trace remains the world has lost. This is why silence is so deceptive. It may not be empty, it may be crowded with echoes we misinterpret. We see only catastrophe, when perhaps we should also wonder, was there more? Was there more? Was there someone? The ghosts of catastrophe linger. They remind us that the earth remembers in scars, not stories. And scars, like myths, are open to interpretation. When we ask about lost civilizations, we often imagine them as reflections of ourselves, tool makers, builders, architects of stone and steel. But what if intelligence has taken forms we would not recognize? Consider the ocean. For millions of years, whales have lived in vast social groups, communicating across thousands of miles with sound. Octopuses solve puzzles, escape enclosures, use tools. Dolphins show culture, passing learned behaviors down generations. What if intelligence once bloomed in the sea at a scale we cannot imagine, collective, networked, fluid as water? Would it leave ruins? No. Would it leave scars in stone? Unlikely. It might leave only silence. On land, consider the insect world. Ants farm fungi, herd aphids, build colonies that span continents. Termites shape massive mounds with natural air conditioning. These are not random behaviors. They are systems, organized, enduring, cooperative. Scale them upward. And what do you have? A civilization built not of towers, but of tunnels, not of metal, but of soil. Then there are the hidden networks beneath our feet. Mycorrhizal fungi connect trees in vast underground webs, sharing nutrients, sending signals. A forest behaves less like individuals and more like one living mind. Could intelligence arise here? Slow, distributed, rooted in soil rather than brain. If it did, what evidence would survive? Here, without forcing it, a rhyme arrives. Brains may fade, and bones may rot, but other minds may leave no spot. The challenge is not only whether such civilizations could exist, but whether we would even think to look for them. Our assumptions blind us. We expect skyscrapers, not spores, satellites, not signals in soil. If intelligence does not match our reflection, we might overlook it entirely. And perhaps that is the greatest silence of all, the silence not of absence, but of difference. Civilizations may have risen in forms unrecognizable, and in failing to imagine them, we fail to see their echoes. This shifts the question. The mystery is not only whether civilizations came before, but whether we are capable of recognizing them at all. Civilizations like to think of themselves as permanent, yet history shows a pattern: rise, flourish, fall. The pattern is not rare. It is common. The Sumerians built some of the first cities, mastering irrigation and writing, but soil salinity rose. Harvests failed, power shifted, and the culture faded. The Maya built vast cities in the jungle, filled with temples and pyramids, yet drought and conflict weakened them, and the jungle reclaimed their stone. Rome ruled an empire that stretched across continents. Roads, aqueducts, and laws bound it together, but internal decay and external pressure fractured it. The empire crumbled. Collapse is not always sudden, but it is always humbling. Now scale this pattern outward. If human civilizations rise and fall so often in just a few thousand years, why not across millions? Why not again and again, each erased until nothing remains but silence? And collapse is not only natural. Sometimes civilizations destroy themselves, exhausting resources, igniting wars, creating technologies that spiral beyond control. The seeds of decline are often planted in the soil of success. Here, a quiet rhyme threads itself into the thought. What we build may be our pride, yet in its strength our flaws may hide. This raises the possibility that civilizations are not rare, but fragile. Perhaps they bloom frequently, but briefly. Perhaps intelligence always discovers fire, but burns too brightly, consuming its chance to last. If so, then the silence of the earth is not because there were no civilizations. It is because they could not endure. They rose, they fell, and time erased them, as time will erase us. History whispers this pattern already. The question is not whether civilizations collapse, but when. One day we too will join the silence. We live in a world of glowing cities, satellites, endless networks of steel and glass. It feels indestructible. Yet history whispers otherwise. Civilizations fall, and ours is no exception. If we vanish tomorrow, what would remain? For a while, ruins, towers standing half broken, roads cracked and overgrown, machines rusting in fields. In 1,000 years, forests and deserts would take them back. In 10,000, little would be left. In 1,000,000, almost nothing. Our monuments to permanence, the skyscraper, the dam, the highway, would dissolve like sand castles. What would endure are only the fingerprints, a carbon spike in rock, a scattering of plastics and sediment isotopes. No volcano could explain. Thin scars of our presence, faint enough to be mistaken for natural quirks. To those who might come after, we would not look like a mighty civilization. We would look like a blip, a brief anomaly, a silence with a trace. And here, softly, a rhyme closes the thought. Stone will fade, and steel will rust. Memory lives in ash and dust. This is why silence is not absence. It is perspective. We stand between two vast silences. The deep past we cannot fully recover, and the deep future we cannot control. In between, our moment shines brightly, but briefly. Perhaps others have stood here before us. Perhaps others will stand here after. Each rise leaves echoes. Each fall returns to quiet. Civilizations may be less like pinnacles and more like waves, rising, cresting, breaking, and vanishing into the sea. So when we look into the silence of the record, we should not ask only, were we the first? We should also ask, will we be the last? The answer is humbling, almost certainly not. The earth is old and patient. Life is stubborn. Intelligence may rise again in forms we cannot imagine, long after our own silence settles. What matters then is not eternity. It is this moment, what we do with the time given, what traces we leave, not just in stone, but in meaning, because the silence will come. But what we leave in the space before it, our choices, our stories, our warnings, may shape the ones who follow. We've wandered through vast stretches of time tonight, from the silence of missing records to the myths that fill them, from chemical fingerprints in stone to the fragility of civilizations. Again and again, we've returned to the same question, are we really the first? The truth is simple and unsettling. We cannot know. The earth does not keep records kindly. Stone erodes, seas rise, crust recycles, memory fades, even myths blur, carrying fragments of meaning, but not proof. And yet, silence is not empty. It is possibility. The missing pages of the earth invite us to wonder, The gaps remind us that what we know is small compared to what we do not. Perhaps we are the first to walk this path. Perhaps others rose before us, their voices swallowed by oceans, their traces erased in stone. Either way, the lesson is the same. Our moment is brief and fragile and precious. It is easy to think of silence as a void, but silence is also a canvas. Onto it, we project our fears, our hopes, our stories. Atlantis, golden ages, flood myths, all are human attempts to answer the quiet. They remind us that even without evidence, the question matters. And perhaps that is the point. The value is not in certainty, but in humility, in remembering that we are not as permanent as we imagine, in realizing that history is not a line, but a cycle. What we hold feels vast and deep, yet time will take, and time will keep. Here, almost as if whispered, rhyme arrives. So the question remains open. Were there others before us? We may never know, but the silence does not diminish us. It deepens us. It asks us to live with wonder. The value of the question is not the answer, but the perspective it gives. It reminds us that the earth is older, larger, and more forgetful than we can grasp, that our skyscrapers and satellites are as temporary as the shells of ammonites once were, that our story is not guaranteed to be the final one. When we began, we asked what it would mean if we were not the first civilization on Earth. We walk a narrow moment between two silences, the silence of what came before and the silence of what will come after. Between them, our lives burn bright, and that brightness matters precisely because it will not last. If civilizations have come before, we are their echoes. If none have, then we are the first spark, and perhaps not the last. Either way, the lesson is humility. The universe is not ours to own, only ours to experience for a time. And here, a closing rhyme rises, soft and unforced. Silence behind us, silence ahead, yet in between, the living thread. That thread is us for now, what we choose to weave with it. What stories we leave in stone or in song is up to us. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, let the question settle beside you, not as a weight, but as a wonder. You are part of something vast, older than memory, larger than time, and though silence surrounds it, your moment is real. Hello once again, and thank you for spending this time with Smarter by Midnight. If you'd like to continue these journeys into science, myth, and wonder, remember to hit like on this video and subscribe. There are always more questions waiting in the quiet and more stories to carry you through the night. Until next time, let the silence remind you not of emptiness, but of possibility. Good night.